Hey y'all. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to express how grateful I am to everyone listening to the show. It's been awesome to see that folks are taking an interest, and I hope you're digging the episodes so far. Please hit me up on social media if you have any thoughts about the show, or just want to say hey. And if you haven't rated the show on your podcast app yet, please throw a few stars this way. Alright, that's enough pre-show chatter. Enjoy today's episode, number 4, Full Boar Francis. I'm Chris Wyden, and this is Leviathan Rising. The load was heavy, but Frances was not going to release any undue groans while she was in the fields. Finding food in Louisiana was easy during spring, and she appreciated that. But with the Gulf Republic reduced to tatters in its war with the Christ's Kingdom militia, you couldn't count on anyone coming to help if you got caught in a bad way. Not that there had been much in the way of aid out here before the war, anyway. Truthfully, the existence of the Gulf Republic, and that Frances resided within it, was news to her whole family when the Republic's official notices were posted in town. People didn't seem to mind much, and no one had heard Jack from the so-called Republic until after the war broke out anyway. And even that was only rumors that had trickled north with travelers. Her father would say they were freer than ever here. "Fuck the Republic!" And Frances would laugh, but she never understood this conviction herself. Rural northeast Louisiana was beautiful. Frances had lived in this area of forests and floodplains for all of her 19 years, and she knew it well. Her father told her that much about this terrain had changed since his time, but he liked it better now. Frances breathed deeply in the late morning. It was already hot as hell, but she didn't seem to care. Fuck the Republic, I guess, she thought to herself aimlessly. She stopped for a moment and moved the carcass from her shoulders, a small boar, but it still was at least 80 pounds. If Frances had been given what passed for an education in the old country, as her dad liked to call it, she might have been aware that boars didn't used to teem across the land. But she wasn't sure she believed that, and frankly, she probably wouldn't have cared either way. Frances checked the knots around the mammal's legs and then took its weight on again. She bent her body down, lifting the boar up on her back so that its front and back legs dangled stiffly off her shoulders. Her head appeared to pop from the boar's torso, hovering in between its legs as if Frances were wearing a carcass shawl. She took a step forward and was startled by a small black snake as it wriggled between her feet. Frances released a yelp in surprise and dropped the boar off her back. "Shit!" she exclaimed into the late morning breeze. Shaking her head, Frances scooped up the boar again. She made it 5 steps forward and then heard the gentle crush of grass and earth. Frances froze. Like a product in a window display from before her time, Frances slowly turned her head. She saw nothing but the long grass and tall flowers around her. The expansive half-wall of plant life rippled silently as the wind skated lightly over top of the buds. She had never encountered a tiger before, but she had seen what happens to those who sight them in close enough quarters, and those survivors rarely survived for long. Frances's father had told her about tigers when she was young. Sighting the jungle cats was by no means a daily occurrence, but it was necessary to teach children about what's out there once they're old enough to spend time outside the village. He would tell Frances that in the time before, people used to own the beasts. They weren't even supposed to be on this continent, he had told her, but some people decided to bring them here and raise them as pets. By 2020, there were over 300,000 tigers raised in captivity like this all over the land. It was assumed that because so many tigers were raised in these circumstances, they wouldn't be able to survive and cultivate on their own. This, as it turned out, was a gross miscalculation. After the spring blizzards and the season of mud, there were very few caged animals that hadn't found their way out of their enclosures, and tigers were among the most plentiful predators that got out. At first, this was viewed as a happy accident. The growing boar population was a problem on most continents around the world, but especially in the United States at that time. The federal government remained but a ghost of its former self. The governing bodies that persisted were akin to the Catholic Church after the fall of Rome, providing a veneer of institutional sanctity that did little to hide the spoiled carcass of a gluttonous empire. And so, without any population controls or organized culling, the already growing boar population exploded. Industrial agriculture had been rendered impossible, and so people began to convert their useless lawns into large home gardens. Much to suburbia's surprise, a well-tended garden often produced a surplus for the household. But that soon proved to be a problem. What people could grow was quickly ravaged by the boars, who swept through old suburban neighborhoods under the cover of night like big hairy locusts. But then the surviving jungle cats began hunting the boar, and it was seen as a weird boon. Sweat streamed down and off of Frances's nose, like the world's tiniest water slide. She swept her eyes across the 100-yard stretch laid out before her. The breeze disrupted her nasal water park for a moment, diverting the salty stream off the bridge of her nose at a right angle. Frances turned around quickly, but was careful not to shift her feet. She tried to peer through the tall blades and flowers. Wait. She refocused her gaze on a patch of red poppies about 50 yards behind her. Were it not for the sea of red buds creating a contrast, Frances would not have seen the pair of yellow eyes looking at her. Frances caught her breath silently and twisted back around slowly and deliberately. She was only a football field from the forest, and once there, she knew where the town traps were hidden. If the tiger didn't get caught in any of those, she figured she could still make it to the tunnel in time. The sun was hot as hell, but Frances cleared her head and took a long, shaky breath. She left the ground. Tall plants whipped her skin as she huffed through the field. Then her panting breaths faded in the background of movement. She was moving so fast, and her mind was so clear in purpose that it might have felt sublime were it not for what was behind her. Frances wasn't even sure she needed to run, but she was also damn sure she wasn't gonna look now. The tree line rose up to meet her, just 10 more feet, and boom, in the trees. But Frances didn't have time to celebrate. These woods were littered with booby traps, and she never navigated them at top speeds before. She made a harsh left at a live oak tree, making a near 45-degree turn toward an area filled with bear traps. The sound of a frustrated, raw power exhaled behind her. Frances realized she wasn't going to make it to the bear traps, so she doubled back. While not a strategic move, this seemed to be the right call, as Frances soon discovered. Maybe 15 yards through the trees, Frances saw the orange and black blur fly past in the opposite direction. This was followed by the noise of leaves and plants screeching against the earth as the tiger came to a halt and snarled angrily. Frances came upon the mines then. She slowed and veered to the right, back into the safe path just in time. As she started to pick up the pace, Frances stole a glance behind her. What she saw forced her muscles into high gear, and they raged with pain in response. The tiger was mid-air when Frances turned around, and it was going to land in the center of the forest's small minefield. But the dynamite was practically irrelevant. It was the tiger's eyes that made her spine go cold. Frances had never seen such unadulterated determination, and she peed a little bit. Boom! Frances clocked the one mine and nothing else. She did not look back, and she kept running. She was close now. Frances knew she was close because she was ripping her skin on the blackberry thorns. Once she made it through this thicket area almost, and there it was, barbed wire glinting in the noon sun. The town, Frances's town, had decided on the barbed wire after 2 consecutive seasons of raids. There were violent gangs that lived around the region, and at least one of them had taken 2 harvests. After that, it was decided the town would build a moat. They could have built a real moat if they had wanted. The winter rains would have flooded it before the equinox. But as it happened, the town was home to a barbed wire factory from before. Curiously, or not so curiously, barbed wire and other tools of incarceration were among the last to go out of production when the economy started to shut down. As a result, the town had a massive surplus of the stuff, and they made a 50-yard wide barbed wire moat to surround them. Better than a minefield, some had said at the time. Some residents were not such big fans, though. It was ugly, and certainly dangerous. Regardless, Frances felt an ecstatic joy wash over her at the sight of the razors. To her, it meant home. Right at the edge of the barbed enclosure, where the forest met it, there was a little divot in the ground. To a passerby, it would look like nothing more than a dug-up patch of earth left by some woodland creature. In truth, it was an entrance. One of the town's artists had teamed up with their resident inventor to design a hidden door for town residents to find the tunnel. This tunnel led under the barbed wire moat and into town. The inventive entrance was shaped like a hobbit's door, but painted photorealistically to look like nothing more than useless debris. Once a person passed through, a series of clever mechanisms would shut the door automatically behind them. On the other side of the door, the earth tilted steeply down, causing the user to slide 5 feet below into the tunnel, where people would then crouch walk to the other side of the moat. Frances was coming up on it fast, so she shifted her weight to her heels in preparation for sliding under. She began to slow, and that's when she felt 180 pounds crash down on her shoulders. Frances was already beginning to go down for a slide tackle into the tunnel, but this force brought her down immediately. She landed flat on her butt, 3 feet from the tunnel. A crunch of agony crescendoed up her back, and she momentarily lost the ability to breathe. And then Frances realized she wasn't dead. The tiger had landed on the boar, sweeping it off her back and protecting her from the cat's claws. Despite her shock, it didn't feel like anything was broken. Frances shuffled forward in a demented crab walk with her ass leading. Her feet hit the door, and she pushed her way down. She looked back in time to see the tiger remove its mouth from the boar with a bloody squelch. Their eyes met again, and time seemed to stop for a second. Frances hung there, suspended in midair with her head nearly at ground level, and the rest of her body now below it. Her gaze was level with the big cat's eyes, and she saw recognition there. Not remembrance, but an understanding between beings. Frances hit the cool earth beneath the tunnel's portal, vanishing into thin air from the tiger's perspective. Frances sat panting in the dark. Her breathing began to equalize after a moment, and then she started to laugh. Tears streamed down her face. Frances got to her feet, and she started down the tunnel back into town. Her father was not going to believe this. Thank you for listening to Leviathan Rising. If you're enjoying the show, please rate us on your podcast app. It's a huge help. To keep up with us online, our social media accounts are linked in the episode description. If you want to send us a note, our email is in there too. Leviathan Rising is created by Chris Wyden. Music is composed and produced by Travis Paul.